Welcome to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Rose, and this podcast exists to help illuminate the path ahead of you. With expert interviews, clinical pearls, and real client success stories, my intention is to bring you hope for what's possible on this journey and to give you tools and resources to navigate the ups and downs on the road before you. If you find this podcast helpful, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And I have a big request. If you have a minute, can you leave us a 5-star review? And let us know, what did you learn? What did you come away with? Did you leave with that spark of hope? This helps more people like you find the podcast. My mission is to support as many humans as possible on their path to become parent. And by you sharing and subscribing, you're part of that mission too. And I'm so grateful for you for being here. Welcome back to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I feel like our topics today are going to be a little all over the map emotionally. Really, my heart is with the people of Los Angeles as I record this, and moments like these where I actually know people who have lost everything so quickly. It can feel trivial to then be like, hey, here's how we get your miracle pregnancy going. That just isn't me. And I'm also very prone to existential anxiety, which, climate disasters and being an empath can really, make things interesting. So that's where my heart and my head have been a lot today. But my original plan for today's podcast was to discuss this sort of annual review that I do. And I posted on Instagram yesterday my annual results post, which I don't know, it's a little bit of an interesting experience. I know that people like when I do this, and people have requested that I do this. People get very interested in what are the actual numbers? Do you see people with PCOS? Do you see people with endometriosis having success? How about someone who has one fallopian tube? How about someone who's had 7 miscarriages? And just as a reminder, I've been doing this for a long time, almost 12 years now, which making me feel old. And I've seen so much that at this point, I've kept stats for the last 5 years on, the specific cases, people who've conceived, the people who've ended up having losses. And that I think really helps to speak to the people who are really questioning whether something can work for them. So I post these as a way of inspiring hope to people who really need to see examples of couples, women, people who have conceived despite the odds. And, in the Brilliant Fertility program, I really preface the work that we do in that program with my clients as, hey, there are statistics. And if you're seeing a reproductive endocrinologist, they are going to talk to you about those statistics. This is a lot of what their work is based on. And, they're required to report their numbers as well. So what we have to be aware of is with those statistics is that there are some conditions, there's, age ranges where it doesn't look good. And that can really put us in a mindset of, gosh, do I really have a shot here? And if someone is already prone to negative thinking, things haven't worked out in a long time. So it's like, gosh, you really want to protect yourself in some ways by not getting your hopes up. And I do feel very strongly that when we build that hope resilience, hope really is a muscle that we build. and we find examples of people who have defied the odds, it gets that part of our brain working differently that says, why not me? And that has been one of the common features of the vast majority of my patients and clients who have defied those odds, have conceived when they were over 40 years old, despite having years of endometriosis, have conceived with PCOS, despite not having ovulated on their own for most of their reproductive life. There's just so many examples of this having happened. And when we go beyond the physical, when we really address the mental, emotional, and spiritual pieces of this, like, that anecdotally in my practice has improved outcomes significantly. In the early years of my practice, even as a naturopathic doctor who focused on the whole person from the physical angle, I really believe that I was missing the boat on the mental, emotional, spiritual in those early years. So with this most recent post, I want to start off actually with sharing a testimonial that one of our BFP clients actually just wrote in today. And this is from Tunde and Simon. Their son Benjamin was born just last month. So it says, we cannot express enough gratitude for the care and expertise Dr. Rose provided throughout our fertility journey. From the very first meeting, she made us feel heard, supported, and hopeful during a time that was emotionally extremely challenging. Dr. Rose's compassionate approach, combined with her deep knowledge of fertility, gave us the confidence to trust the process. While other doctors pointed straight to IVF, mainly due to our diagnosis of unexplained fertility, combined with Hashimoto's disease, Katie Rose looked at our situation holistically. In her program, she explained every step along the fertility journey, answered all of our questions, and tailored discussions specifically to our needs. Thanks to her guidance and expertise, our baby boy Benjamin was born recently. Words cannot express the joy and gratitude we feel. If you are searching for a fertility specialist who truly cares and supports you, we wholeheartedly recommend Dr. Katie Rose. She's been a blessing in our lives, and we will always be thankful for her role in helping us build our family. Okay, that's almost hard for me to read out loud. Like, it's very uncomfortable for me to like toot a horn or toot my own horn. And I also think it's just really, really valuable for people to, again, hear from someone who had been pointed towards IVF, who had been on the verge of that process. And had we not looked at the other factors that were feeding into that nutritionally, mentally, and emotionally, and spiritually, I don't know that they would have had the foundation for that. And, turned out they didn't end up requiring it anyway, which was a huge relief on so many levels, from a scheduling standpoint with the jobs that they had, from a financial standpoint, from a stress standpoint, from, no one wants to have to inject themselves with needles. And I'm not opposed to IVF. I think the science is truly miraculous. And I'm a strong proponent that we really need to set the foundations before pursuing these treatments. So with the 41 pregnancies in my practice in this past year, and honestly, it may be different than that because, as some of you may know, I left a practice that I had been employed at for 10 years in August. And as an employee, I didn't have access to those records after I left. So if there were any that I missed, or if there were people who ended up conceiving after the fact, that practice doesn't specialize in fertility. And that was one of the reasons I left, is I felt it was really important to begin my own practice that will have a fertility focus. It's challenging being one of the very few people in our community who focuses on fertility from a holistic lens. And my dream, my goal is to create an entire practice that is focused on that with, other providers and interdisciplinary providers who are also focusing on that. So, acupuncturist, therapist, naturopath, and really have this team approach so that people feel supported on multiple angles. And so having left that practice and having, like a 4-month gap of not having access to records to like go back and double check my notes, see if there were any changes, any other pregnancies. Like if people messaged me like, oh, I wouldn't have gotten the message because I don't have access to that patient portal. So some of this data may not be complete, unfortunately, for this year. But 41 pregnancies, and these are people who primarily had complex situations. So 17 had been diagnosed with unexplained infertility. 17 had experienced previous miscarriage. 9 had experienced recurrent pregnancy losses, so meaning more than 2 prior miscarriages. 23 of them were over 35 years old. 8 of them were over 40 years old. 3 of them had confirmed PCOS. 11 of them had Hashimoto's. 5 of them had confirmed endometriosis. 3 had previously failed IVF treatments. So they either had not resulted in viable embryos after retrievals, or they had multiple failed transfers. And within those people who had previously failed IVF, one of them went on to repeat an IVF cycle with a new physician at our urging after her first 2 cycles with someone who she wasn't getting a viable embryo. And it really strongly encouraged her to seek out someone who was willing to work with her unique situation in a very, very tailored manner with the retrieval, the stim medications. And she ended up having a phenomenal experience with a different doctor and made a beautiful embryo. And that embryo worked on the first transfer. So she's now coming close to the end of her pregnancy. We had several people, 2 others who had previously failed IVF who went on to conceive without assistance. And that was something that they didn't believe that was possible for them. And that was part of what we worked on, is their belief system of what's possible. And if they weren't able to hear about other examples of people who went on to conceive without IVF after having gone through IVF, they may not have been able to change that belief system. So I do want to reassure you that there are multiple avenues to changing beliefs. And that's something that we can certainly devote an entire episode to. But I do want to just review a couple of these cases that were particularly inspiring. The other piece of data that I don't have as much information as I would like on is how many of these cases involve male factor. I can say without a shadow of a doubt that at least a dozen of them had some involvement of male factor. So either a low sperm count, a low motility, a low morphology. Statistically speaking, across all infertility cases, male factor will account for 50 to 60%. And I really think that's important to know, because the burden of all of the infertility things often falls on the partner with the uterus and the ovaries, because they're the one making the eggs, they're the one carrying the child, and they're also only 50% of the DNA. So we absolutely need to address the male factor involvement, and the fact that that DNA that is packaged up inside the head of the sperm is so incredibly important for the health of an embryo, the health of the placenta, some of the symptoms that a mother can experience during her pregnancy. Anything from a morning sickness to preeclampsia actually have correlations to male factor DNA and the epigenetics, so whether or not there are certain genes turned on or off. So again, that could be a tangent for another day. Just want to get a little seed planted there on the male factor piece. We're not playing a blame game. This is teamwork, but we really want some awareness there. All right, so I do want to give some particular attention to a couple of these 41 pregnancies that occurred this past year. One of them, I recall the first day. So she actually came to me as a patient first before she joined the Brilliant Fertility program. And she had been through 4 rounds of IVF. Um, so 3 retrievals, 4 transfers, and I could I could just tell how much she was hurting. Uh, I would actually go as far to say it's like she was in a place of burnout potentially, where it's almost just hard from that place of burnout to really like care about what happens next. Like there's a part of you that still really, really wants it. And then there's a part of you that's like, I just can't. And so where we decided to at least just focus first was how can we just make sure that physically, nutrients are in appropriate levels and hormones are at appropriate levels. And then started having the conversation around, well, even if these are in low ranges and we can supplement them, we still have to be asking the questions about why they're low, what's happening with stress in the body that might be using up more nutrients, what's happening with the potential of honestly trauma in how long of a journey that had been, how hard it had been, and the fact that there's really no resourcing for the mental and emotional pieces that are so challenging on the fertility journey. These fertility clinics, uh, the vast majority of them don't have resources for addressing that. So if someone comes in and an embryo transfer doesn't work, they might be like, well, these things happen. You want to throw the next one in, when we really need to be pausing to check in with people and say, like, how are you doing with this? How is this experience or this loss occurring to you? And make sure that they're actually emotionally ready to do anything. So I could tell that this patient was hurting. And as we talked about options, and she had talked about how isolating the experience had been, I mentioned that the program might be a helpful place because being around other people in a positive environment who know exactly what you're going through and can bolster your spirits is powerful. Like we regulate our nervous systems in community, and that community is so important to our healing. And that's why I've created this community. So, as I've watched her over many months begin to find more joy in her life, begin to actually process some of the hardest things that they had gone through on their fertility journey, I really began to see her like coming back to herself, or what I imagined, because I didn't know her before the fertility journey, but really started to witness this like blossoming into her beingness. And it was so beautiful. And, of course, we're also tracking the physical things. So we're looking at the menstrual cycle. We're, you know, checking on what their ovulatory signs are, if they're in a healthy mental space to be actually tracking their basal body temperatures and cervical fluid and charting them, then I'm watching their charts as well. And so I'm watching her charts over the months, like just getting healthier and healthier and healthier. And there's one chart in particular where she was like, oh, could you take a look at this? And she was, already about 13 or 14 days post ovulation. I'm looking at it and I was like, oh my God, I just know this is the one. And I didn't want to say anything because, you don't want to get anyone's hopes up. But I was just not shocked a couple of days later when she said that she'd gotten a positive pregnancy test. And of course, like we've talked about this on the podcast before, how after years of infertility, in this case, 5 years, after years of infertility, and if someone has experienced losses, it can be really challenging to feel happy and excited with a positive pregnancy test. It can feel like just waiting for the other shoe to drop. So I'm sensitive to that, and we're still going to find ways to celebrate. and stay present to this moment and not allow the lens of the past to cloud the possibilities for the future and prevent you from enjoying the like right now. Today, I am pregnant. Today, I trust that I have done everything within my influence to support this healthy pregnancy. And I surrender the pieces that I have no control over. And that's really what we have focused on to really keep her going, especially since she'd already graduated from the program. So we wanted to make sure that there's still some ongoing support there. Another one of our BFPs from 2024 was someone who had been told that she would likely not conceive or have her own children because she had Hashimoto's. And she was told this at a fairly young age, well before she was even thinking about having children. And that really stuck with her. That was something that she had. And actually, now that I'm like looking at my list of people, I realized that this was a story that at least 3 of these 41 people had heard in their lifetime. Because I'm always asking people, like, what was your very first experience with thinking about the possibility of getting pregnant? And for some people, it's when they were 12 years old and their period started and their parents flipped out that, oh, well, this means that you could also now get pregnant. So like you must never touch a man, like don't ever have sex. So, a lot of purity culture issues with, the reality of, how fertility works. But with this person's particular situation, having been told that because she had Hashimoto's, she would not be able to conceive, like this was just something that she took as fact. And when she first came to see me, and it, was very much like from a mostly like, I don't actually know if I want to have kids. I just want to like get as healthy as I can, like try to get this Hashimoto's under control and like see what happens from there. But I could tell there was like this mask on. And when I started asking a little bit more, I was like, well, if everything could go exactly the way you wanted, like within your heart of hearts, if no one could get hurt, if nothing bad could happen, what would you want? She's like, oh, I would absolutely want to get pregnant. I would absolutely want to have children. And I just have never thought that was possible. And it's like my heart just like breaks all over again as someone with Hashimoto's. It's like my heart breaks because I wonder how many people are hearing stories like this, people who have PCOS and had irregular periods in adolescence, people with endometriosis. Like there are so many situations when someone could have received that messaging. And when they take that on as fact, it's like their body really starts to also follow that as rule. So when we start to change our thoughts, our beliefs, our body can follow suit. I'm going to get into a lot of this in the 3-day virtual fertility retreat, you guys, next week. So head to the show notes, make sure you are signed up for the retreat. It's this will be the second time we've done this particular style of retreat, and it was so beautiful when we did this in the fall. We really focused on the tools for nervous system regulation, but also looking at how we think, how we process emotions, and how are we looking at each person as the unique individual miracle that they are on their fertility journey. So yeah, head to the show notes. It's brilliantfertility.com/3-day-virtual-retreat. And you can go ahead and sign up for that. It's free. And I do this because we have this world where 1 in 6 couples will be diagnosed with fertility issues. And unfortunately, I don't think that particular statistic is going to get better in our lifetime. And I want to do everything that I can to make sure that people know that there are resources and that we have to be looking at this from a mind, body, soul perspective and not just throwing everyone into these aggressive IVF cycles without proper preparation. So, we will be getting into subconscious belief patterns, emotional processing, what it means for your body to be stuck in fight or flight mode. And I think we all kind of know what that feels like, right? Like fight or flight or freeze. We're in that zone where we're just like ready to run. And I personally, like, I get very like tense in my chest. I get very like scattered brain, or like I hyper focus on one thing that like doesn't really matter, but can't make decisions about the things that do. And in this time, in this like day and age, and like, whew, we we are going to need all the help we can get when it comes to getting out of fight or flight, regulating our nervous system, having a support network of people who aren't just venting and complaining. One of my like highest intentions with the containers that I create is that we are here to support each other. And sometimes there will absolutely be hard shit happening. There, people who are in my BFP right now, they are having some hard shit, some totally non-fertility related hard life things happening. And because they are in the Brilliant Fertility program and they have been learning the skills to regulate their nervous system, they are getting through it in a way that they never thought they would be able to before. So, this is why it's really important now more than ever to decide to do something differently. These 41 people that we had with their miracle defy the odds pregnancies in 2024, they decided to do something differently. And it wasn't necessarily the path that seemed easiest at first. And yet, the vast majority of them will tell you that because they learned the skills to regulate their nervous system, because they learned how to process their emotions, because they learned what they needed as a unique individual and not just checking things off a list from an influencer's blog post, they had an easier time than they believed they could. And I try to make things fun because we need humor and we need lightness, and we need to be able to see the light in ourselves and the light in others. So in the retreat, in the Brilliant Fertility program itself, in my one-to-one sessions, like there's always room for authenticity and space for being able to say, this fucking sucks and this is hard. And I would like to be able to handle these challenges with grace and self-compassion and be able to take care of myself through the chaos. And that's what my people do. And they get really good at it. And what's pretty cool about that is there are ripple effects into other areas of life, into their careers, into their relationships, into parenthood. And so this preparation for parenthood is different than just like, hey, take 17 supplements and like, yeah, might budge your egg quality. It might result in a pregnancy, but it's not going to prepare you for parenthood. No way regulating your nervous system will. So I'm really excited to share some of that in the 3-day virtual retreat. I love sharing the stories of these people. And obviously, if you go through the Instagram post, we can link that in the show notes as well. You'll see that there were hard parts of this last year as well. I had 6 clients and patients experience some form of pregnancy loss. So, one chemical pregnancy after an embryo transfer, one ectopic pregnancy for patients who had miscarriages. And while that stat is still average, that or lower than average than the national statistic of 1 in 4, and here we're dealing with more like 1 in 6, 1 in 8, it's still the hardest part of my job. There are never the right words to convey how devastating it is. Knowing I want the best for all of my patients and clients. I don't want anyone to have to go through this. And I go through my own little ego trip of wondering, like, is there anything that I could have done differently? And I think we generally speaking come to the point where we are able to trust that we did what we could, we did what we knew to do. And I'm honored to be there for people as they're going through those really challenging times. But that's hard. I share the wins, but I also share the reality and the growth that comes from giving oneself space to grieve and be able to safely share that grief with other people who understand, can actually lead to something beautiful in its own way. All right. So the other factor that I have about, this annual post that I do is, like, I really hate boiling people down to a case, or like, the 41st person got pregnant. Like, I hope you all know, like, you are not a number. You are not a diagnosis. You are not PCOS. That is not your identity. And when people initially come to me, they're often like, have you ever worked with someone who has endometriosis, 1 tube, and 2 miscarriages? I'm like, that is a very specific situation. And I can guarantee you I've worked with all of those things on some level. I don't know if I've worked with someone who has had that very specific layout, but I could actually go in and find out since I started tracking this data over the last 5 years. So on one hand, like, I really hate to boil it down to numbers and diagnoses. On the other hand, I know that it can feel really hopeful if you're hearing about someone who had multiple unsuccessful IVF cycles, who then conceived without assistance, or someone who had had multiple pregnancy losses who conceived and carried to term. That is really hopeful. And, given we had 9 people who had recurrent pregnancy losses who are now well beyond their first trimester or have already delivered this year, including 1 set of twins. So we'll actually get 42 babies. It's that gives me hope, and that will allow me to keep going in this work, even though a lot of it is challenging as well. I think we do have to share our wins. We have to share realities. There's always room for authenticity in my world. It's preferred. Actually, I should say it's required at this point. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge each individual will have different needs, even if they have the same diagnosis as someone else. So there's no one size fits all fertility treatment. And what's really important, no matter what, is that we stay curious, we stay open-minded, and we're looking at all of those different pieces, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And I will talk about those 4 bodies in the fertility retreat and how they relate to each other. Because I would say in Western medicine, they're just focusing like 75%, up to like 95%, depending on the clinic, depending on the physician, on the physical piece. Like, what are the uterus and the ovaries doing? So I just know that 11 and a half, almost 12 years of doing this, there's more to the story. There's always another puzzle piece that we can be addressing. I don't really believe in unexplained infertility. It might be an unpopular opinion. But most importantly, it's this person's body feeling safe to conceive. And what that's going to require is going to be different for everyone. Okay. Well, thanks for sticking with me. I hope you join us in the retreat. Head to the show notes, brilliantfertility.com/3-day-virtual-retreat. We'll have a fun little intention setting exercise to kick that off. And then 3 days, and these aren't like full days, so don't be intimidated by the word day retreat. These each section of the retreat will be, between 45 minutes and 90 minutes, just depending on how many people are on there live. Honestly, like I really do tailor it to the people who show up live and are willing to fully participate. And even just from the last retreat that we did in the fall, within a couple of months of that, I got messages from people who had gotten their positive pregnancy tests after more than a year of trying to conceive, just saying, thank you. Like this cleared up so much of like stuck emotion and belief that I didn't even realize I was dealing with. So there is so much that can come from this experience if you're willing to come in and fully participate. And there will be some fun bonuses for the people who are on live as well. And on day 2, we'll be going into a meditation. I wish I could tell you exactly what that's going to look like, but as I go into that, I usually just pull from what the people who are on live have spoken to and need in that moment. And then in the 3rd day, we really talk about like, how does it all come together? Like, how do we address all these 4 big pieces with the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual? How do we have those all come together so that you can embody your most fertile identity? That's what it's all about. All right, I'm sending you guys so much love to my LA people. If you are listening, my heart is especially with you today with the fires. And I mean, I'm sending love to everyone, all of our listeners. I'm so, so grateful for you. And if you got something from this episode, if you could pause for a moment, leave a rating, leave a review. This helps it get to more people. And I think we could use more people who are getting some hope in their world, or learning how to regulate their nervous systems, or spreading love and kindness. So I appreciate so much when you pause to spread that love and kindness with your review as well. Take care, and we will be back next week.